What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get.
Welcome to episode 1409 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. The Advantaged Investor Podcast from Raymond James Canada. Valuable perspective for Canadian investors who want to remain knowledgeable, informed, and focused on long-term success. And Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making his Toronto Mic debut is Haroon Siddiqui. Welcome, Haroon.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure.
Little rainy out there today. Not like, what would you prefer? A rainy January day or a snowy January day?
Rainy is fine any day. I'm from the tropics. You should never forget, I'm from India.
You're from India. Okay, we're going to cover this. What year? Actually, I happen to know the answer, Haroon, because I read My Name Is Not Harry. This is your memoir.
Yes.
Enjoyed it thoroughly. We got a lot of ground we're going to cover about your life and times, and I'm interested in the convo. But I feel, I said this to you before I pressed record, I feel sort of like I've been living your life the last few nights. Like I've been living your life. Like I feel like I'm Haroon, and I came from India in 1967 during the Expo 67. I know it all.
Yes, thank you. I made you do your homework, yes.
Well, interesting life. But before we dive in, I have a note from Chris Zelkovich. And Chris writes in, "Welcome, Haroon, to the Toronto Mic'd Club." And Chris is basically welcoming you into the fraternity of FOTMs. You're now an FOTM, Haroon.
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much. Yes.
You worked with Chris because I know you were working at the Toronto Star from 1978 to 2015. That's a long time.
That's a long time. And Chris was one of the valuable colleagues at the Toronto Star. One was blessed to have worked at that time, to be surrounded with great talent and a management that had seemed to have an endless supply of money and resources for you to do things, which is not the case anymore, unfortunately.
Times have changed. Okay, we're going to cover that. I wanted to ask you about a specific person you worked with because sadly, shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. We just lost this gentleman, but you worked with George Gamester, right?
I did, yes.
Would you mind sharing some memories of George?
George was a quintessential Canadian in that you never heard him speak ill of anyone. He was always pleasant. He was good company. He had jokes to share. And it was just easy to be around him. I had come from Brandon. I did not know too many people. And George was one of those people who just welcomed me openly, frankly, in a friendly kind of way. And that's how it remained until he left.
And when you say quintessential Canadian, in 2024, is that still true that a quintessential Canadian doesn't speak ill of anyone?
We hope so. even though we have tides of Americana coming to our shore once in a while and eroding some of our common decency that one associated with Canada and Canadians and so on. One hopes we still have those red lines and that we don't cross, which is all the more reason to give more life to a historical Canadian fact that we define ourselves as not being American.
Right.
Then some people, especially right-wingers, say, that's a negative assertion. No, of course not. It's a very positive assertion. We know who we are and who we don't want to be.
Right. Oh, man, this is going to be a great combo. I can tell already. Congratulations off the top. I know it's been a couple of decades, but congratulations on being named a member of the Order of Canada. That's That's a wonderful tribute to you.
Thank you. Long time ago.
Long time. What is it? Like 2001, right?
2001.
If you lost the pin, do you still have the pin?
I still have the pin. I lost only one pin, and I've been very careful with it, and I maintain it. And I still have my Order of Ontario, which was given in the year 2000, and I did not lose a single one of them.
Okay, good for you. That would be my worry. I lost the pin, darn it. Okay. Now, I mentioned off the top, you came to Canada during Expo 67. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about life in India and why you came to Canada in 1967?
I had never heard of Canada until one English professor had prescribed a book called something like Lessons in Education. It simply so happened it was published by the University of Toronto. It had nothing to do with Toronto. It was a British author. In any case, then you knew of Canada as this cold, vast, immense landmass, and then nothing more than that, because nobody ever taught us Canada as such, until I was working in what was then Bombay and now is Mumbai, and the Canadian High Commissioner Roland Michener, long before he became Governor General and one of our better Governor Generals of Canada. And he had come for a trade mission, I think, if memory serves right. And in one of those receptions, small talk, he said something like, young men like you should go to Canada. And me, in my youthful impertinence, said, why would anyone want to go to Canada? It's so cold there, isn't it?
Right.
And that was the end of the conversation, And then, but the idea stuck. I think that was 1963. And in 1965, I had gone back to Hyderabad because my father was ill and I had to look after the family business. And some friend said a Canadian immigration officer was coming to do interviews. So I put in a letter saying, I'm sorry I did not apply before. Can I come and see him or see you? I forget which one. I said, sure, come on over. And the interview was done. And I think he said on the spot that I had made it, which simply showed that the standards were very low at that time for entry to Canada. So I got my papers, but it was 65. I could not leave. 66 came. I could not leave. And the deadline was coming. So I wrote a letter saying, can you extend this? Still not knowing whether I was going to go to Canada. And then 67, then time was running out. And then I did come, and it was in the dying days of Expo 67. It was a marvelous, marvelous experience. It was a kind of thing that we have not seen in Canada.
Right.
People are upbeat and nice and great and so on. So anyway, I got to see it. And then within 4 or 5 days, I came to Toronto. And the rest is history, as they say.
Okay, but again, your permanency, if you will, in the city of Toronto starts in 1978. So there's a decade missing here we have to discuss. Now, when you arrive in Toronto in 67, I guess what's the goal? You're gonna be a journalist in this country. You're gonna get a job at maybe the Toronto Star. Is that the goal?
No, I applied. Of course, start with the national newspaper, the Globe and Mail.
Right.
I arrived on a Saturday, I think, and Monday morning I was in the office of Clark Davey, the legendary managing editor of the Globe and Mail, a crusty old man. And he said, no job for you. I said, why is that? You have no Canadian experience. I do have Canadian experience, journalistic experience. I've worked part-time for the BBC. I've done some work for the Associated Press, this and that. And he said, those are portable qualities. I said, no, I hired 2 Indians and they were no good. So I said, Mr. Davey, you're saying because you did a bad hiring, you're going to penalize me.
Right.
And he was totally, thoroughly unapologetic and said, yes. But I can recommend you that you go to a Canadian small place and get Canadian experience. And I know just the place for you. I said, what is that? Brandon Sun in Brandon, Manitoba.
Brandon, Manitoba.
I said, why would anyone go to Brandon? It's even colder there than here. And he said, think about it. So that was the end of the conversation. But when I came out of the office, I was irritated. But I just got this sense of this like a gruff uncle who was dishing out tough love. Right. There's nothing mean about him, despite his demeanor and so on. Anyway, I was determined to prove him wrong. I applied everywhere. Telegram, Toronto Star, every newspaper I could think of. And I got rejection letters from every one of them, including the Perth Courier, which I still have. Then I got a job at Simpson's, which is now the Bay in the basement on Queen Street, selling men's clothing, which was lovely because you were one of the best dressed young men around for.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Did that for about good 8 to 10 months, and then even Toronto Hydro PR department would not give me a job. Thank the Lord for that in retrospect. And then I went back to Mr. Davy and said, I think it's time for you to make this call. And sure enough, without any hesitation, he said, yeah, sure, I'll make the call. And he called the Brandon Sun. And there I was in Brandon, and in the middle of fall. And I had a job, and Garth Stuffer, the gruff old news editor, said, I hope you know what frontage foot is. So I said, I have no idea what that means. So he said, you better learn it because you're covering city council as of Monday night.
Wow.
So that was that.
Okay, so you were sent sort of like if Toronto is the big leagues, you were sent to the minors to put in a little work before
Correct.
you. Okay, I got you. No, it's funny that you mentioned you worked in the Simpsons downtown, the men's department, because years later, so I guess we're talking about late 60s, I guess you're there, and in the 80s, they would film a kid show on TV Ontario called Today's Special. Like Today's Special was filmed in that very Simpsons that you worked at.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Really? You just taught me something.
I taught you something. See, that's
Yeah,
what. See, we're
there you
going to
go.
teach each other. We're going to teach each other. But I had Muffy. There's this show which people my age know Today's Special because we're kids and it's kids programming on TVO. But the mouse always spoke at rhymes. The actress has actually been on Toronto Mike. There's also an FOTM. But the thing was there was a mannequin, and I'm trying to remember, when you put a hat on him, he came to life.
Oh, it did.
So at night, and he would, this men's. So I have a feeling that you've walked on this sacred ground. That
No, that was
Today's
sacred
Special.
ground. It was also sacred ground, not sacred ground in another way. Just outside, in those days, used to go the Orange Parade. Orange Day Parade, So, what is this all about?
Right.
So, it's like, this is the Belfast of Canada, And so then, this reminded me of the old Shia Sunni parades in India. And you needle each other. The idea is to irritate the other party constantly. So thank the Lord, that's all gone.
All right, so before we get you back to Toronto in 1978, you spent a decade, I read, again, everybody should know that my name is not Harry. And I want that story too, because I know that story comes out of Brandon, the name of this book. Because don't worry, I will never call you Harry, it's Haroon. But people should check out this memoir. It's quite fantastic. But one of the chapters is called An Indian on the Prairies. What was life like in Brandon, Manitoba?
I had gone to Brandon with the specific idea that I would get Canadian experience in 1 year and scoot out. But I ended up staying for 10. Because first of all, it was a small independent newspaper and one of the better independent newspapers in the country. The publisher was independent, Mr. Lou Whitehead. He owned it. And he invested a lot of money in editorial. It had for a paper of its size, it had more editorial people than anywhere else. It spent money on training us. He used to send us to the United States, to Toronto for sessions and so on. A whole way of doing things that no longer exists, And we learned on the job, and they trained us to do so. So courtesy of him, I stayed 10 years. After 2 years, he made me city editor. Then when he was making me managing editor, he called me to the office and said, I think this job is going to be yours, but tell me about yourself. So I said, you already know, Lou. I've been working here. No, tell me about life in India. This, that. And he kept asking me, what else did you do? What else did you do? And I said, I used to manage my father's construction business because he was sick. How long did you do that? I said, about good 2-3 years. He said, that's it. Those are portable qualities, he said, And here we are told constantly of having no Canadian experience. And here is this man, enlightened man, sitting in Brandon, Manitoba, saying those are portable skills, Right. Everything has to be done. When it has to be done, it has to be done. You can't postpone things. That's like journalism, he said.
Right.
So, and then he made me managing editor in 1978. 74, I became managing editor, and the first managing editors conference I went to happened to be in St. John's, Newfoundland. And there was the day before, as usual, there's a pre-conference reception. I go there, and who do I see? Is Clark Davy. And he spots me. And his first sentence, as soon as he sees me, he says, you made it. Now you can come to the Globe any day you want. I said, can you believe this man, after so many years, has... He's true to his word, and he says you can come. I said, Mr. David, I just been named managing editor. He said, no, whenever you're ready, you can come. So that sort of that's, to me, that is sort of quintessential Canadian too. He kept his word,
Right.
and he was nice. And then I did come in 1978.
But not to the Globe and Mail.
No, what happened? That's a story, another story, because he offered me a job, and I was coming to the Globe. Then he phoned. He said, I want you to know something before you read it in the paper. And what is that, Mr. Davy? I am going to the Vancouver Sun as publisher. I won't be here, but I have arranged for you to keep this job, and you will be the factotum for the editor-in-chief, Mr. Doyle. I said, but I don't know him, He said, no, it doesn't matter. In the meantime, I used to attend the managing editors conference every year, and Ray Timson, the other legendary managing editor of the Toronto Star, used to come. And he phoned out of the blue and said, I hear you are coming to Toronto. I said, yes. No, what are they offering you? I said, so much. I'll give you 5,000 more. I said, they're giving me 3 weeks of annual holiday. I'll give you 4. That's how it went. And I said, okay, Mr. Davy is not going to be there, so I'll come to the Toronto Star, and I did come. And the second story about the Toronto Star is, the thing was they used to just throw you into the newsroom, into the sea, and forget about you. So I was being circulated from night shift to night shift, sports to family to this and that, and I ran into him in the elevator. I said, Mr. Timson, what did you call me here for? And he got irritated, and he jabbed his fat finger into my chest. And he said, boy, that's how they used to talk in those days. Boy, you must know something about this place. And what is that? We pay you for what you know, not what you do. I mean, can you believe, can you imagine any manager in any profession in this day and age of obsession with productivity would say that we are paying you for what you know, not what you do. So we are collecting talent, and there'll be time when we will use you, and we will use you, and they did use me. That's how it went.
All right, I got to bring you back to Brandon just for a moment. I have a couple
Yes,
of questions here. Home of the Wheat Kings, by the way.
Of course, home of the Wheat Kings, good hockey team.
Right.
But they got beaten by the hard-hitting folks from Bobby Clark's team from the Paw. Were they from the Paw, or were they from Churchill?
I don't know Bobby Clark's life before the Flyers.
Bobby Clark was from the north, from the Paw, I'm sure. And they used to play rough hockey, yes.
For sure. Well, they played rough hockey in the Flyers too, the Broad Street Bullies.
Exactly,
Okay.
he took it with him.
He hacked the who is it? The Russians, Karlamov. He hacked the bone.
The bone of it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, now and that doesn't sound quintessential Canadian to me.
No, he was not. Maybe he was quintessential Northern Manitoba. You see, let's just blame it on Northern Manitoba.
We're myth busting here. Okay, but the title of the memoir, "My Name Is Not Harry." The origin for that title, that's from an incident in Brandon, right? Can you share that story?
Not in Brandon so much as in Winnipeg.
In Manitoba, right, Winnipeg.
What happened was that occasionally I used to go to the legislature to cover the legislature. And during my time, Ed Schreier was premier, and then Howard Parley. And then Sterling Lyon became the Conservative leader. He became premier. Brilliant man, brilliant. Very conservative, but very conservative and very old-fashioned. And he used to call me Harry. And I told him I think that my name is not Harry. And one day again he said, hi Harry, how are you? I said, Premier, I've told you many times my name is not Harry. I'm Haroon. That's my name. And there was sort of pin drop silence, and he walked away. And I had mentioned this story to Adrienne Clarkson, who happens to be a friend, some years ago. And she said, that's the title of your book.
Right.
I said, what? Said, no, that's the title of your book.
She's right.
So she gets full credit.
Okay.
So Sterling Lyon gets full credit, and then Adrienne Clarkson gets full credit. Two disparate individuals.
Amazing. In your book, you did. I did put a bookmark in here because I like fun facts and little trivia and stuff.
Yes,
and you have a section here called, and we are jumping around in time, Haroon.
Yes.
We'll get you back to 1978 in our time machine. But there's an interesting list of Canadian firsts. And then you mentioned Adrienne Clarkson, and you have down here the first refugee and Chinese-Canadian Governor General. That's back in 1999. And I did quite quite enjoy your list of Canadian firsts.
I'm sure the other readers will have their own list of firsts, and I'm sure I've missed some, and I've since discovered that I have.
Oh.
It's just an indication that Canada is more open to minorities and so on. Minorities of different kind. Jean Chrétien from Quebec, first French-speaking finance minister in Canada. Sergio Marquis, the first immigration minister in Canada. Many firsts like that. Susan Eng, first Chinese Canadian head of the police services board in Toronto. What that shows you is a certain openness to new individuals and so on. Not unlike France, you live for 2 generations and they still think of you as an immigrant from Algeria. As
Absolutely.
a Maghrebain.
Well, I was struck also by in this list you have provincially too. You mentioned Kathleen Wynne, first woman premier of Ontario, and the first openly gay premier in Canada. And this is just my way of telling everybody that I had a nice conversation with Kathleen Wynne.
Oh, you did?
Earlier this week, and she is booked her visit. She will be here in early February to sit in the Haroon seat there.
Oh, you'll enjoy her company. She's lovely.
Are you guys still friends?
We are friends, yes. I'm old-fashioned, you see. So what happens is while you're doing the job
Yeah.
and you're reporting on them, you keep your distance. And then over time, after that relationship has evolved, you become friends. And that used to be the case in Manitoba as well. And that used to be the case between leaders too,
Yeah.
They were adversaries. They were not enemies, not unlike today. The current conservative leader of Canada is forever taking pot shots, which is his job, but also getting personal all the time. Trudeau's inflation, Trudeau's housing prices, Trudeau's this.
Right.
Okay, so it's snowing, it's Trudeau's snow,
Trudeau brought us this rain today.
Today, Trudeau brought us this rain. I mean, he's made many mistakes and he continues to make them, but this is not one of them.
Right. Okay, we'll touch more on that later. But okay, so 1978 to 2015, you're working at the Toronto Star. We talked about how you ended up at the Star. By the way, fun facts, since we're dropping fun facts in the show. During your time reporting, you saw 10 Canadian prime ministers in office and you reported from 50 nations. This is quite the life you've led, which is why you had a memoir to write here, and Adrian Clarkson can present the title for this. See what I did there? Adrian Clarkson presents. Okay. What can you share with us? I'm very interested in what the Toronto Star newsroom was like in 1978. Can you share with us who was there? I mean, what was the vibe at 1 Yonge Street? It has radically changed, as you know.
The newsroom, you see, back to Ray Timson, the legendary managing editor, he had a glass door in front of his office. He did not want it closed so he could look out onto the newsroom. And he used to say, when I look out of this room, this glass door, I can see a dozen foreign correspondents. This idea of accumulating talent and so on. So if something happened somewhere, they could pick up someone on the shift at that time and send them off. That's exactly how it went on with me. Mike Pieri, the managing editor, the foreign editor, said during the hostage crisis in Iran post the revolution, he said, we want you to go to Iran. I said, when do you want me to? Tonight, now. Wow. Within minutes, they had arranged for American Express travel cards, this, that, here is your ticket, everything arranged. You just sit in a taxi and go. And I said, can I go home? Why, do you have a family? I did not have a family. So what do you want to go home for? Just go to the airport, be done. So that's how it was done, you see. And the resources were absolutely no bar at that time. Bielan Heinrich, the owner of the paper and publisher at that time, he has a penchant for firing managing editors because he never quite knew what he really wanted. He knew he knew what he did not want, but he did not know what he wanted. So he kept firing managing editors. We used to say, this is B's Stalinesque way of management, But Bielan famously once said, I have never fired anyone for spending too much money.
Wow.
And that was the mentality. So I went to Iran. I was there for months and months. not months and months, weeks and weeks. And then the call came on the telex from Mike, said, the Soviets have invaded Afghanistan. Can you go there? Translation into English, go now. Right. So I said, okay. So then I went to Delhi. I got the visa. I went to Afghanistan and I landed there. That was quite an episode. But nonetheless, but all the telex lines were cut off. There was no telephone. So how do you send copy? I mean, we think of the internet and we take all these things for granted. In those days, sending copy back was a big task, especially when the lines have been cut off. What do you do? So I ran into Mark Tully, the famous BBC correspondent in Delhi. I said, what are you doing? Oh, that's easy. He said, you go to the airport, the days that the Indian Airlines flight comes, and you take your envelope, you give it to the pilot, you beg them, you plead with them, or you bribe them, and they take your copy back to Delhi, and they then transmit it from there. I said, well, so I said, maybe it will work. And then I started doing that, and then I started making carbon copies, and I used to go and to the PIA, Pakistan International Airlines flight as well, beg and do whatever I need to do, beseech the pilot and the crew. Can you take this to Peshawar and hand it over to the Reuters news agency office, and here is the money for the taxi and so on. And this went on for 4 weeks or 5 weeks. I have no idea if a single word had made it back.
Right, because you don't get a copy of the Toronto Star.
You don't get a copy. Nobody's phoning you. The telex are cut off. It's just endless. Anyway, after 5 weeks, I come out to Peshawar, and the first thing I do is I phone Mike Peary and said, did you get my copy? He said, did I ever get your copy? I got 2 copies of most of you. Thank the Lord for that, So that's how it was done in those days.
What a difference! Like it's just to hear you tell that story. It's like All the President's Men or something. Like that's the journalism style. Now, okay, the Toronto Star newsroom. Though, when you arrived in 1978. Can you remember some of the people that were working there? Like I know some who bled into my era of reading the Toronto Star, which starts in about the mid '80s. That was the paper delivered to my house, was the Toronto Star. So I was like, oh, Milt Dunnell was there. But who do you remember from the newsroom back in 1978? No,
there was Gerald Latting, the legendary foreign correspondent. He followed me to Afghanistan, for example. Right. And Jerry was the guy who had gone to Uganda, and Idi Amin had put him in jail. And when Ating went to Afghanistan, Ating was nosing around too much around the army and bases and so on. So Mike Peary tells a story of how the soldiers there shot a round around his legs, as a warning, and said, get out. And that's how scary it could be. But Ating was fearless in terms of how he reported and so on. There were other great columnists like Rosemary Spears, who used to cover Queen's Park, for example. One of the early feminists, one of the earliest journalists in Canada to warn us about the environmental peril that we were facing. I was her editor at one time, and she used to berate me and said, you're not taking this seriously. And so with Rosemary, you just simply was like a sister to me, you elder sister, whatever Rosemary said. Yes, Rosemary, no, always say yes. But she was quite the person at that time, There were other editors and writers, and Mark Gain, for example, used to write a foreign affairs column. On a permanent basis, Toronto Star had a foreign affairs columnist who used to write. There was Ian Urquhart, who was a first columnist, correspondent for Maclean's in Washington, D.C., and then he was our columnist in Ottawa. Carol Gore, Bob Hepburn, Martin Kahn. These are all sort of people of great stature. And then there was Richard Gwynn, the columnist who used to write. Right. Before that, Anthony Vestel. Before that, Pierre Burton. These are people of great stature. And some of them were brilliant writers. I mean, many of us are writers, but we are hacks. You see, we are really hacks. We know how to put together an argument. We know how to put together a story. But writers, Slinger was a writer. Tony Vestel was a writer. And now Tom Walkham is a writer. There's a grace to their writing, you see, that flows. To people like me, writing is hard work. You have to sweat over it and make 19 drafts before a column comes,
Right. What about, okay, you touched on this in the book, but you are an Indian man, a Muslim Indian man. What was the diversity in Canada? What was diversity like in the media at this time, 1978?
You see what it is that people don't realize it. And when you think about it, you can turn cliches on their heads. I'm from India. India is a 3,000, 4,000-year-old multicultural civilization. Every conceivable kind of person lived on your street: Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, Zoroastrian, and so on. The clothes people wore were entirely different from each other. This is an inbred tolerance and celebration of each other. My parents, my father was a product of a madrasa. When you think of a madrasa, you say, oh my God, terrorism. Yeah? No, the madrasa was a venerable institution where Hindus also used to go and study at that time. But my teachers were mostly Hindu Brahmins. So I was a great failure in college. I had failed at pre-medicine. I had failed at pre-engineering. I had dabbled in science. And then I went to English literature in masters. And then I switched to journalism. And I went back to my father and said, Abba, I think I'm going to try journalism. Instead of getting angry, say, what the hell are you doing, you idiot, and so on. His first sentence was, have you asked TGV? TGV being the short form for T.G. Vaidyanathan. He was my English professor. He was a Brahmin. Here is this bearded product of a madrasa who had become a businessman. He's asking me what my Brahmin teacher thinks of this crazy idea. And I said, I've spoken to TGV, and TGV said it will be all right. And my father said, if it's all right with TGV, it's all right with me. Can you imagine this? I mean, in the Indian pantheon of greats, parent and teacher occupy very high places. So here is a Orthodox Muslim differing to a Brahmin teacher with a sacred Brahminic thread across his chest. And he says, if TGV thinks it's okay, it's all right for you. Going into a profession that nobody had ever gone in my family.
Right.
That's the kind of respect that people had for each other. So I come to Canada, back to your question.
Sure.
And there's the Orange Day Parade. And there's no diversity. Most important and least political is no diversity of food. So I could not find yogurt. I can find only something called sour cream that I had never heard of. So I get it. It's like a blob that bloated your tummy. No lamb, no goat, only beef that I did not grow up consuming at any time. Very few fruit, vegetables, spices, nothing. No guava, no mango, no papaya, no brinjal, no okra, no gourd, nothing. No coriander, no cloves, no cumin, no cardamom, no saffron.
Wow.
Saffron? Oh, saffron, you can get it during Easter time near a Ukrainian bakery, somebody said,
Right.
Can you believe that? And now here we are, 50 odd years out, and Canada is the cuisine capital of the world.
Wow.
This is the change that demography has brought to Canada. This is extraordinary.
That is extraordinary. And again, I was alive in 1978. I'm surprised. No yogurt. That's the one that most shocking to me. No yogurt.
There was no yogurt in 67. I can vouch for it.
67, right.
Oh, the yogurt story. When I went to Brandon,
Yeah.
but there were 5 or 6 or 7 Indian families. They used to bemoan all the time, for God's sake, we cannot get any yogurt. I phoned my mother and talked to her and said, this is just state of affairs. There's nothing here. So she said, in that case, son, you better come back home. So I'm glad I stayed here. That's one. And then one of the Indian families, a Dr. Gopal, his wife, Kala, was going to Mangalore in India. And then she smuggled back a little bit of culture of yogurt on the plane with her. And then she put it in the oven overnight. And lo and behold, she had the first yogurt set. And then she distributed samples to all of us. We were all set after that. So yogurt was born in Manitoba, imported from Mangalore by an Indian lady.
But so in Toronto in 1978 though was
no 78, but we were getting very very good.
Now we're getting yogurt. Okay,
yes,
that explains it. I got you. 67, not much no yogurt. 78 yogurt has arrived. Now, what about in the media? So, what was the diversity like in Canada in the media when you were starting at the Star in 1978?
Yeah, diversity was almost zero. It was not to mince words, it was the newsrooms were white. The journalism was white, more important than that, because that's a very layered kind of observation, because it was a white man's view of the brown man, white man's view of the Aboriginal peoples, white man's view of the black people. And then the worst thing was that they could not distinguish. They had the world divided into us and them. Us here, them there in Africa, India, and so on and so forth. But the problem was when the them started coming to Canada, like me, they were becoming part of us. But the media could not distinguish. They were still treating these brown people and so on as though they were foreign entities in Canada. You know, that was quite a shock. And in fact, that led to a long, long campaign on the part of, if I may toot my own horn on that.
Yes, please.
By myself.
Toot away.
And a few others saying this is ridiculous. I mean, grow up. And again, full credit to the Toronto Star. They gave me full rein. I said, besides doing your own job, you know, help diversify, do this, do that. So when we think of diversity in this country, we think of fixing the payroll. Can we have enough of this, enough of that, enough women, enough of brown people, enough this, enough that. But if you waited that long, it will take a long time for the content to change. Right, and there's another problem with it. So what are we saying here? Only we need Chinese Canadians because only Chinese Canadians can report on Chinese Canadians? Is that the point? We need women in the newsroom, which we do, because only women can report on women, on and on. So I'm not a believer in this appropriations debate, you know, saying only certain people are qualified to write. No, as a journalist, you are qualified to write about anybody. You bring the same standards for every issue that you do, but you need to be aware of it. What would be helpful in covering Chinese Canadians if you knew some Mandarin and if you knew some Cantonese and if you knew something about their culture, what they do, you know, how they live, what is important to them. Why is it that they emphasize their children's education so much more so than some other people, if that cliche is true. That meant that we had to concentrate on changing the nature and character of our content in the newsrooms of the copy that we produced. So this they versus us mentality that permeated the coverage had to change. This was the tougher thing to do. And it's still a problem. It's changing, obviously. That's how we view the world. That's how we used to view Canadians. Now we tend to be more inclusive. But the perceptions that we have still keep getting in the way, you know. I mean, you write about the Muslim world, you think of them as backward people, terrorists, this and that. Is that universally true, you know? So we have to be aware of our own biases in how we report, how we write about people. It's not an easy thing because, not to put too fine a point on it, it was a majority white country. That was the country it was. It is changing. Canadians have changed remarkably quickly, but we are in a learning process. A positive way of looking at it is that this is a culture that is alive, that is evolving every day, that's changing. It's only a fascist culture can be a static culture where nothing changes, you know. This is the greatness of Canada, that it's evolving every day. It changes. Every generation feels they can change it for the better and go ahead and do it.
And evidence, I reading your memoir, and evidence of the change is that the Toronto Star, Canada's largest news, it's still, it's a shrinking pie, but it's still Canada's largest newspaper, the Toronto Star. Toronto Star hired from Brandon, Manitoba, Haroon Siddiqui in 1978, and you had a number of roles there. You were a journalist, and I'm going to ask you in a moment about becoming a columnist, but you've said a couple of times you were given free reign, like essentially you're not yet another white guy at the helm. You bring different perspective.
No, but you see, they treated me professionally. So whereas I've been critical of the practices of the day,
sure,
in terms of day-to-day contact, I personally never faced racism, either in the newsroom or in Canada, which is a surprising thing for some people. No, I didn't. Which does not mean that there is no racism. Mm-hmm. There is plenty, obviously, but in terms of a day-to-day, my own, I never faced any racism.
Well, may I ask then on that topic? So racism, you as a gentleman from India, but did you experience Islamophobia being a Muslim man?
I never faced Islamophobia either. I mean, there were historic prejudices towards Muslims going back to the Crusades and so on. Remember, there was the specter of the Islamic bomb. Pakistan is going to have an Islamic bomb. Okay, did we have a Christian bomb before that, and a Hindu bomb, and a Buddhist bomb, right, or a Jewish bomb? So those prejudices were there. But I really felt it after 9/11.
Okay, you know what? Let's do this. I definitely think we need to dive into Canada post 9/11 and 9/11 and you as a columnist. So by that point, you're already a columnist, right? So tell me about the change from journalist to columnist.
It's sort of evolved, you see. First I was a reporter, then I was a city editor, managing editor in Brandon, then a copy editor here, then foreign correspondent of sorts, being sent on special assignments here and there. Then I became national editor. As national editor, I learned, I presided over the coverage of the Multiculturalism Act, the policy of multiculturalism. I had to learn it. I knew multiculturalism by instinct in India, but what is multiculturalism? What is constitutional multiculturalism? What does Section 27 mean? How does it play itself out in a day-to-day life and so on? One had to educate oneself. So as national editor, you're blessed with staff of such caliber that they educated you, the editor, as right, opposed to you doing it the other way around. Then I was named editorial page editor, which meant fashioning the editorial policy of the newspaper, presiding over the editorial page, the opinion page, and the letters page, and the cartoonists and the columnists and so on. And then John Heinrich, the late publisher, made me the offer of being a columnist. And that was 1999. And I think by that time, he gave no reason for it. But I had already spent good 9 years or so, or 8.5 years as editorial page editor, which is a long stint. He gave no reason, but I have said in the book, kings don't need to give you reasons.
Right.
They do what they do. I had pushed him back many times. To his credit, he had not fired me in the meantime. And I think he may have had too much of my pushing back. And he offered me the column, but he said, at the same time, you keep your role as a diversity promoter in the Star, and senior management position will remain. You'll remain part of the senior division's head and so on. Columnist. So back to your question. Switching to columnist is a different genre altogether. As an editorial page editor, you are simply collating the views of the editorial board, putting it into, they are writing it, you're guiding them, or you're writing the occasional editorial. The institutional force of the newspaper stands behind the editorial. There's no name on it. There's a good reason for it. It doesn't say, this editorial today is by Mike Poon, or Mike whoever, or Haroon Siddiqui, because then the reader's prejudices or liking of you gets in the way of their receiving that editorial, which should be received on its merit, good or bad, persuasive points. That is the institutional strength of the editorial. As a columnist, you put your name on it. Your damn picture is on it. Right. It's yours to own. which means people can take pot shots at you. Oh, you Siddiqui from India, do you know nothing? You're an ignoramus and so on. All of a sudden it gets personalized.
Right.
But then people don't realize it from outside. Writing is of a million kinds. Columnist, you can be a columnist of a dozen kinds, You get on your soapbox. Do you use adjectives every day? You shout, or do you use reason? Do you lower the temperature? Do you let the facts do the talking and hope at the end of it like hell that a penny drops in the reader's head? I've always said the greatest compliment you can get from a reader is say, I didn't agree with a damn thing you said, but you made me think.
Right.
Thank the Lord. This is Canadian civility at work. He disagrees, she disagrees, but says, oh, you made me think. What more do you want?
Right.
So and they started. We used to have a dictum. A columnist is a reporter first and foremost. So you do your own reporting as opposed to rewriting somebody else's copy. So you need to talk to people. You need to consult experts and so on. Their names may or may not appear, but it is the cumulative knowledge that you are passing on. You are going on a journey, and you take the reader on the journey with you, so that they say, I learned something from this. I learned because every time you write a column, you learn something yourself. And you take the reader along, and that to me is a better way of writing a column than just sort of jabbing your finger in people's faces. This is not Hotline Radio show.
Right. So 1999, when you become a columnist, then 9/11, 2 years later. Please tell me what it's like being a columnist in Canada's largest newspaper when 9/11 happens on September 11, 2001, and how you see Canada change post 9/11.
You see, the first column that I wrote after that was, of course, in solidarity with the American friends for their loss. Second column was in the same vein. The third column was headlined, Is the American Foreign Policy Stupid? And that, in effect, argued, this is horrible as it is. It's a cumulative response, a cumulative explosion, if you will, of the American foreign policy that has been at the forefront of killing and butchering many, many Muslims around the world and being unfair. And then the moment that column came out, the establishment came thundering down my head. How can you say that? This is not the right time to say it. It's the best time to say it, because that's the reason. And including one or two of my bosses were quite upset about it. And then within about 48 hours or 72 hours, I've forgotten, I had 750 emails or thereabouts. An overwhelming majority of them said, thank you for saying it. So what do we have here? We have an establishment that is more pro-American than Canadians themselves. A majority of Canadians are saying, thank you for saying it. This is what has caused it, as horrible as it is. That was one part of it. So this divergence of the establishment thinking one way and majority of Canadians thinking another way was one revelation right away. And then a significant minority of Canadians became very abusive and anti-Muslim all of a sudden. And from a journalist who happened to be Muslim, I became a Muslim journalist. I was personally responsible for all of these terrorist acts and so on. Something has happened in Beslan. I know exactly what my inbox would say. What do you have to say, Siddiqui, about this happened in Beslan? I am responsible for what happened in Beslan. This collation of collective guilt onto all Muslims. So 19 terrorists were Muslim on 9/11. So all Muslims are terrorists? Is that the point? The counter-argument is, but most of the terrorists these days are Muslims. So, at some point they were Muslim, and they were Tamil Hindus, and some other time in 1940s they were Jews in Israel, and so on and so forth. What does that prove? Nothing. Do we say that because of the IRA all Irish people are terrorists? No. So this was the second revelation, that a kind of Islamophobia and bigotry appeared that I did not think existed in Canada. That was a second revelation to me. But then you see, you develop a thick skin as a journalist. You say, okay, this comes with the turf. Don't take it personally. Just get on with it. And that's what happened, you know. I just kept going, and I kept writing what I wanted to write. Nobody ever told me what not to write, except once that John Heinrich said, he had come back from Florida and he brought a column by some Muslim woman. So you should write you may consider writing like this, or words to that effect. And I knew who the columnist was. The columnist was of the type that was a new cottage industry that had grown up in North America. Some Muslims who were more critical of Muslims than the others. So, you know, in the old days, we used to call them Uncle Toms. So there was a great demand for Uncle Tomery at that time. Tell us, confirm for us our prejudices, how bad your own Muslim people are. So here is a whole band of Muslims writing, yes, Islam is very violent, Muslims are very violent people, so Sharia is bad, on and on. So we have extraordinarily selective, third-rate journalism, a colonial practice that the British used to use in India, and the French used to use it in Algeria and so on, and the Maghreb. And you find locals who will do your bidding for you, who will confirm your prejudices for you, you know. And the main body of Muslims just simply were absent in the media. What do the majority of Muslims think? I mean, you know, can we find out? No, there's no room for them anywhere in this narrative. And then that takes us to 2003, that the Iraq War, on this trumped-up charge of weapons of mass destruction.
The proof is the proof. I remember the Chrétien speech there.
And, you remember, good for you. You see, that's a very, very Canadian moment. Here is the Prime Minister who said, where is the proof here? You know, United Nations inspectors are not telling us. He had a backbone. And he said, no. And he called me on a Saturday. I got a call from the Prime Minister's office, which happens once in a while if you're a columnist or editorial page editor. I said, the Prime Minister wants to talk to you. Of course, what do you say to a Prime Minister? Of course, the Prime Minister wants to talk to you. You talk.
Tell him I'm busy.
Yes, so, and he said, I am going to the White House on Monday to see Mr. Bush. What do you think I should tell him about the Iraq War? So I said, Prime Minister, far be it from me to tell the Prime Minister of the day what to tell the President of the United States. But if your question is, what am I hearing from Canadians? Yes. I said, I'm hearing overwhelming opposition to this war. And you know what the old grizzled Prime Minister said? He said, that's what I hear, especially from new immigrants, from new Canadians. His antenna was up. You see, he tweaked onto something that is a new feature of New Canada, is that most of the new Canadians bring a different internationalist sensibility than the old parochial one. Old parochial one was you looked up to London. Then you looked up to Washington. Here are people who are kind of saying, no, we know this is crap. Why are we getting involved in this Americana? You know, we did not go to the Vietnam War. We did not participate in it. Why do we want to participate in the Iraq War? He was on to it. And then, of course, in typical Chrétien fashion, he low-bridged it in Parliament. He did not make much of it. He said, if the United Nations approves it, we would be there with our American friends and so on. I mean, that's extraordinary. Up to this day, anytime he gets up anywhere or the Liberals anywhere mention that moment, round of humongous applause in this country, you know.
Haroon, think about it. Think about it for a moment here. Okay, so you as a young man, you arrive here in 1967. And 35 years later, you're receiving a phone call from the Prime Minister of Canada seeking your advice, your insight, which I've been enjoying this past hour, as to what he should say to the President of the United States of America. Let that soak over you. That is remarkable.
No, that's not as remarkable as you're making it out to be. Mr. Chrétien was a very smart politician. He got on the phone all the time across the country. He did not rely on polls. He consulted people across the country all the time. You must remember, here is a prime minister who used to rule this country on the basis of one-page memos. He told bureaucrats, don't write me these 40 pages. Give me the essence of this in one page, But he used to talk to people. And he had an innate sense of what the country was, what the pulse of the country was. I mean, just think of last year. He's 91, 92
Yeah,
now?
he's up there, yeah.
Up there. He was in Alberta last year. And there was this whining that's been going on in Alberta lately, separation, this and that. And what did Mr. Chrétien say? Separation? So tell me, if you separate, will that get you a coastline? Brilliant. Brilliant,
Right.
He didn't have to say anything else.
Right.
So, no, Mr. Chrétien was consulted people. That's it. So it's nothing
Okay, but
special.
Then let me just remind you that humility is also a very Canadian attribute that you're demonstrating right now.
No, that's a fact. Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm enjoying the conversation very much, and I find your insight fascinating, and I would think that John Honderich was wise to give your voice such an amplification back in 1999, so that Canadians, we have it coast to coast.
John was constantly told by people, what are you going to do about this Siddiqui guy? And it turned out nothing. You see, he was one of those old-fashioned publishers who protected columnists. Said, they have their voice, and I will not interfere. That's extraordinary. That doesn't happen very much these days.
I think you might be right about that. Now, we talked a little bit here about John Chrétien, but I'm curious your thoughts. You covered, of course, the Stephen Harper period as a prime minister. What did you think of Stephen Harper as a prime minister?
He was prime minister. He had a backbone of steel. He knew his mind. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, and he would not listen. That was a negative quality. I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember the famous question 19 of the national census. Question 19 was a detailed question that Statistics Canada and the census people ask in some detail. Who are you? What is your ethnicity? What language do you speak at home? This. And he, in some libertarian flash, said, we want to get rid of this question 19. Question 19 is very important. Question 19 is very important to people, not sociologists across the country. It's important to municipalities, school boards, businesses, because it tells you what services need to be provided where, and so on and so forth. But he said no. And there was a storm of protest across the country. But he would not listen. So Mr. Flaherty, who was his finance minister, former finance minister for Ontario, and his political minister for Ontario, very powerful man, he comes to Toronto at that time, and on a Saturday or Sunday, whatever, he was having breakfast with a local Tory. And the local Tory tells him, what are you going to do about this? This is ridiculous, we conservatives are looking stupid on this thing. And Mr. Flaherty reportedly said, you obviously don't know the boss. Number 2 man, Deputy Prime Minister, political in charge of Ontario, says you don't know the boss. He cannot tell Mr. Harper that he should not be doing this. So that's the answer to your question. That's one.
So it's safe to say, before we get to number 2, Stephen Harper was not calling Haroon for advice on
No,
what
of course
he should
not.
say.
No, in fact, Mr. Harper never even came to the Toronto Star editorial board, let alone Haroon Siddiqui, No, you see, one of the most negative things he did, and one gives him the benefit of the doubt, he ran the most anti-Muslim administration in modern era. He was at Donald Trump before Donald Trump. So, was he ideologically anti-Muslim, or was that just a thing to do because that's where the wind was flowing at that time? There were votes to be had. And one cannot think of a contemporary prime minister or any prime minister dating back a long, long time that so overtly, officially, openly opposed a group of people based on their faith. That's what he was doing. I mean, he sidelined the mainline Muslim community. He would not talk to them. The only Muslims he talked to are the kind that I have mentioned before, who would confirm all the prejudices of the Prime Minister. That was an extraordinary period. And, but out of some bad, great things come out. It is the Canadian judiciary that always upheld the rule of law. In the case of Mr. Harper wanting to, for example, floating the idea of taking away the right to vote for women who wear the niqab, full face covering. You and I may not like somebody wearing a full face covering, but on what legal basis do you withdraw the right to vote? And it was the chief electoral officer who said, no, I will not do it. Then Mr. Jason Kenney wanted to deprive the right of a niqabi woman from taking the oath of citizenship. It was the courts that 3 times turned him down, Omar Khadar, it was these courts that said no to at every turn for Mr. Harper's turning this young man into a poster boy for his anti-terrorism policies. We may like or not like what somebody is doing, but there's a rule of law in this land. And it is the courts and it's the judiciary that upheld it in the end, And the government was forced to pay Mr. Khadr $10 million. We may agree and disagree. This is the democratic debate. But it was the courts. So something good always comes out of these things, And then 2015 comes around.
Yeah.
And they come up with this stupid barbaric cultural act, and that was one straw too many for Canadians, and they got turfed out. That's what happened.
Yeah, these anti-Islam policies, that rhetoric, it doesn't sound very Canadian.
No, it is. Muslims overwhelmingly voted against Mr. Harper in 9 Toronto area ridings. The Muslim turnout was 87%, and 2% voted for the Conservatives and 65% voted for the Liberals, or whatever, democracy.
Wow.
Action. But it's the Canadians in general that voted, that revolted against all this and said, no, this is too much. This is non-Canadian. And the government got toughed out.
Right.
So,
although it sounds like that party might be on the verge of returning to a majority government.
that's
any concerns about a return to that?
No, you see, that's yin and yang of democracy. And there's a what is the word I'm looking for? Incumbency factor. Incumbency fatigue takes over at some point. That's what happened to Kathleen Wynne. There was nothing she could do to turn that tide.
Right.
And it looks like Mr. Justin Trudeau cannot do anything to turn that tide. But that's the sort of ups and downs of democracy.
Right. I'm going to quote you. So I'm going to quote you, Haroon. This is what you wrote. Multiculturalism changed Canada for the better. Now we are the only Western nation with an overwhelming consensus in favor of immigration. This is remarkable at a time when skin color is the major fault line in the U.S. and across Europe. So this idea that skin color is no longer a fault line in Canada, I'm wondering if you would mind elaborating on that and just explaining.
No, what it is. I mean, what Mr. Trump did and what Mr. Biden is facing, this so-called threat from the Mexican border. That's one.
Sure.
All across Europe, there was this idea of Eurabia coming up, meaning Arabs are taking over Europe. Some fantasy. In England, they are trying to deport refugee claimants to, where are they sending them? To Uganda or someplace like that, some stupid policy. Canada is the only place where skin color is almost no longer a dominating factor. It is still a factor, but not a dominating factor. That's one. Number two, you treat each other not on the basis of your skin color or your ethnicity or your language, but your adherence to the Canadian law and what you can contribute to this economy and what you contribute to this society for the common good. This is a revolutionary idea. It was Mr. Pierre Elliott Trudeau who had said there is no official culture in Canada. All cultures are equal. This is a revolutionary statement. For a majority white Christian country to hear that and accept it by and large, is revolutionary. I mean, there was a pushback. Certainly in the 1990s, you remember Preston Manning and so on. We must return to our European roots in immigration. Translation: stop the Brown Express. That's what it was. But Canadians have moved on. There is still discrimination. Ukraine, we have 185,000 refugees that have come from Ukraine. People from Gaza, new restrictions, new things have just been published, regulations, torturous, cumbersome, impossible. Of course, we must do security checks, but children and women, we need to do security checks and so on. The two Michaels were held in China, but there's a Uyghur Canadian who is held in China as well. But the media was totally silent about it. So we still have not 100% equality, but on balance, in comparison to other nations, we are well on our way to have made an extraordinary transition in a very short period. Never in the history of humanity have so many changes taken place, and the place has become so heterogeneous in such a short time, and accord these people equality as much as possible. This is nothing short of a revolution. So, my friend Mort Weinfeld, the sociologist, professor from McGill, he sort of looked at this book and said, none of my students would agree with you, all these positive things you say about Canada, because they're very, very negative about the country or how racist we are. And so. And I said, I'll come and speak to your class if you want, But the point is, they are right because they are young, they are enthusiastic, they want to change things overnight. Who was Desmond Morton, the great Canadian historian, who said, every Canadian generation feels the need to change the country for the better, and often does. So these people are doing their thing. Canada is not nirvana yet, but it is as close to nirvana as it gets.
Well, that's very insightful, very interesting. And again, everybody should know that My Name Is Not Harry is available now. This book, it's a memoir by my guest today, Haroon Siddiqui. Why did you write your memoir? Are you planning to die? Is this the next step? What is the memoir for? At the end of the road?
No, what it is, I started writing. I thought I would write a simple book with a working title of How Canada Has Changed for the Better.
Right.
In my lifetime, kind of argument, you see. That gives you a canopy under which you can put things. And one of my former editors, who was the editor of my 2006 book, Being Muslim, Patsy Aldana, she's a good friend. She said, no, you write about your origins in India. And I said, why would I write that? I want to write that, but that's a separate book. And Patsy said, no, write about your origins in India, because we are an immigrant country and we bring complicated stories to Canada, which is what enriches our fabric. It is extraordinary for her to say that.
Right.
And that got me going into this, diving into the history of India and so on.
Yeah.
And then you have to learn to write cross-culturally so that you're not bored to death and you stop reading and skipping to the next chapter. Hopefully you have succeeded. But that ended up proving something. Disproving a cliche. What is a common Canadian cliche in mythology? Better not bring your baggage from old country to Canada. Excuse me, what about the French and the English,
Right.
They brought their baggage. We're still paying for it in Quebec in some ways. Second cliche is people who are religious are retrogrades. They are backward people. But as I told you the story about my father and my Hindu teacher, those people were more liberal and more secular than many of the secularists and liberals in Canada today. So this idea, sometimes the baggage from back home is good, because if you bring the multicultural ethos of India here, that proves to be useful and valuable. The families fight against British colonial rule, gave us an independent streak that is useful in Canada in the post 9/11 period to resist Washington's dictates. So we can think for ourselves, for God's sake. We don't need to take orders from Washington.
Haroon, so Canada let you succeed on your own terms.
Yes, it did.
You could stay a proud Muslim man. You could keep your cultural values from India and your connections to India. You didn't feel any need to assimilate, as they said.
Assimilate is a bad term. I mean, you remember that great Peter Zawski program, a radio show in the morning. He used to have these fun competitions, and one of the competitions was complete the following sentence: as Canadian as ... So the big competition for weeks goes on and on. The winning entry comes from a high school student. As Canadian as possible under the circumstances. Can you believe that? And Peter had a great time with it. So what it is that Canada has no official culture. So it follows that there is no standard way of being a Canadian beyond obeying the law. We all can be Canadian in our own way. And more important, Canada lets you be. That's the point. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I only vaguely know what marijuana smells like. I haven't been to McDonald's for 40 years. I don't drink Coke. I don't drink any pop. I don't tweet. I don't have a Facebook page. I don't do social media. On and on it goes. I've never been to Vegas. I have not been on a cruise. I don't golf. I don't own a cottage. Canadians, let me be me.
Right.
That is the ultimate sort of tribute to Canada. You can be what you want to be so long as you obey the law and, of course, pay your taxes. That's very important.
So it's safe to say, when you arrived in 1967, looking back over your life and times here in Canada and most of that time here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, any regrets?
No, none whatsoever. We are blessed. I always say we are blessed to be Canadian.
Love it, man. Love the conversation.
Thank you.
Enjoyed the book. My Name is Not Harry by Haroon Siddiqui, a memoir. Thanks for dropping by and having just a tremendous chat. Really, really, really appreciate your insight and love the convo.
Thank you very much and good luck with the show. I'm very glad that you made a success of it. What did you say, 1,000?
Oh, that's a good question because I'm going to say it now. 1,409.
No, that's
the 14.
May you have another 1,400. Yes.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,409th show. You just heard from the man himself. You can't follow Haroon on social media. Don't go looking for him there. If you want to learn more about Haroon, My Name is Not Harry is the name of his memoir. Available now from Dundurn Press. Much love to all who made this possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery, delicious fresh craft beer brewed right here in southern Etobicoke. That's Palma Pasta. Go to palmapasta.com, authentic Italian food. Recyclemyelectronics.ca, that's where you go if you have any old devices, old electronics, old cables. Don't throw it in the garbage. Go to recyclemyelectronics.ca. Raymond James Canada. Everybody should subscribe to the Advantaged Investor podcast from Raymond James Canada, hosted by Chris Cooksey. And Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. See you all this weekend. To be specific, I think we're all getting together Saturday at 4 o'clock for another episode of Toast. We're kicking out definitive Toronto jams, and as usual for Toast, it will be Bob Willett and Rob Pruce. See you all then.